Hey guys, what's up? My name's Lachlan Perry. Welcome to Author Interviews. In this podcast, I'm joined by Morgan Quaid, an indie author from Brisbane, who's published the first installment of an extended series that covers comic books, short stories, and novels. As always, if you guys enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to find out more about Morgan and these videos, you can find our socials below. All right, awesome. So as I like to do in my other interviews, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about you as an author before we start getting kicking on your novels. To start off with, when were you inspired to become an author and really start getting your work out there?
So look, I've always had an interest in writing since I was a kid. So when I was very young, I loved reading epic fantasy and sci-fi and those sort of big world, alternate world kind of adventure stories. And I loved just writing and, that imaginative sort of stuff. But it really wasn't until I was in my sort of late 20s, I think it was, mid to late 20s. I had a very, very dull job in a call center. Yeah. Incredibly boring. And that was actually a really good impetus for me, because I thought, I can't do this with my life. I can't just sit here and this is it. Yeah, exactly. So that's when the idea kind of started that, look, I've got to do more than just write little things. I have to write novels. I have to try and get something out there and try and build this into something that I can do something with. So I actually started writing while I was in that job, on the bus on the way in, on the way out, all that sort of stuff, because it was like a shift work kind of thing. And I think it was, an hour and a half or hour and 20 minutes either way on the bus. So there's so much time to start doing that. And that was really where it started. So I'd always wanted to, but never really thought seriously about it until I was looking, down the barrel of a job that was intensely boring. And I thought, oh, come on, I've got to do something different. And that's where it started.
So tell us a bit about your background. Did you grow up in Australia?
Yeah. Always been in Australia. So I was born in Melbourne, stayed in Melbourne most of the time when I was a kid. My family moved to WA for a few years, but I was sort of too young to really remember. So most of my memories of childhood are in Melbourne, around the sort of Ringwood, Croydon kind of areas. And then when I was a teenager, we moved to Cairns, which was a big move, incredibly different to what we were used to. We moved to the beachfront, which sounds amazing, but it was the worst beach in Cairns, the worst house on the worst beach in Cairns. And it had, so there's our house, which was this sort of ramshackle building, barely held together. Then there was a road, dirt road, and then there were rocks, and then there was mud. And there was about an inch of sand just before you got to this thick, deep mud. But as a teenager, it was amazing. I loved living there. It was such a good experience as a teenager. Everything was dirty and salty and felt gross and all the rest of it. But you're right on the beach, or the muddy beach, right on the water. So that was amazing. So yeah, I've kind of gone all over the place. And then obviously now I'm in Brisbane. So kind of a mid step, which is nice. And I've been here since I got married and had a son. So I think 22 years I've been in Brisbane now. So this is kind of home.
Awesome. So how has writing progressed for you over the years? Have you started doing a novel and then dropped it in pursuit of another idea?
Yeah, so I started writing epic fantasy and very quickly realized, so I still have a draft of my first epic fantasy book, which is about 160,000 words. I started to realize as soon as it went to editing, this is just going to destroy me. It's too much. It's too big. It's going to take too long. I can't do it. So that sat for a while, and then I started looking at other areas. And what I eventually moved to, or have developed into, is first person present, very fast paced, narrowly focused stories, but set in a very expansive fantasy sci-fi world. So I can't help myself from building a really big world, because that's what I love, and that's what I enjoy doing. But writing in first person present kind of forces you to really narrow it down to that person's perspective and to bring the reader along a journey without getting lost in, 7 pages of describing a rock or a castle or something.
Yeah.
So that's the style I've gone to. And it also I'm really attracted to characters that have a smart mouth and that, say the things that we wouldn't normally sort of say, or we would want to, but we're not allowed to, and that sort of stuff. And being in that first person perspective allows you to kind of speak through them and have the reader sort of speak through them as well, which is really cool. So that's kind of the development. So since that first novel, and I think there were 2 that I was toying around with, I've written, so I think I'm on my 10th novel now. In that shorter sort of 80,000, 90,000 word format, and all except one, I think, a first person present. And that was also it was really interesting because the first person present perspective, there's the danger that it becomes like it's written by a 5-year-old, like I did this and then I did that and then I did, so you have to think of inventive ways to make it interesting to.
Yeah, definitely. So was there a particular event in your life that inspired you to write in the sci-fi or fantasy genres?
No, I just have an intense distaste for reality. I think I just don't. I'm not interested in politics. I'm not interested in science, except where there's a cool idea that I think you can explore in a narrative setting or something like that. Never been interested in anything like that. And if you give me a choice of books to read, now, I mean, I've studied philosophy and read a lot, in university and all that sort of stuff. But I'm just always drawn to anything weird or, a little bit strange or an alternate world or anything. So I guess, I'm one of those individuals that just is much more comfortable in a fantasy world than in the real world, because the real world just feels,
Too dull.
it's just a bit dull. Yeah, it's a bit
right.
boring.
Yeah. So you're obviously a very musical person by your background and all those guitars I see behind you. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how music has inspired your writing.
Yeah, so music and writing have kind of gone hand in hand. They've both, I've kind of explored both at the same time and worked as a producer and worked with indie artists, as well as just composing things myself. And in different styles, and I write for film and TV occasionally, and that sort of stuff. That's actually what funds part of the writing side of things. Like most writers, I'll have periods where if I'm writing an action sequence, I'll have certain types of music going on that could get me in the mood. If I'm doing something suspenseful, I'll have that sort of music. Although you have to limit that. I find about half an hour in writing something suspenseful, if I've got music in the background of that genre, it will, my teeth will be clenched and all my muscles will be, too tired. And so you've got to kind of limit that. So I do tend to do that. The other thing though is so for any projects that I do, I haven't done it with novels yet, but for the comics and graphic novels that I produce, I always do a music album to go along with them.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
To sort of get people in the character and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And one of them that I have that's actually, I think it's coming out next month, is a book of short stories set within this sort of fantasy world. And the idea is there's short stories and then there's a song tied to each short story. So you listen to the song while you're reading the short story and it gets you in the mood and all that sort of thing. So that's a really interesting one. It's quite hard to communicate and control because obviously you can't force people to do that. But I've tried to do those sorts of things and try and blend the two mediums together, because I think that they both tell a story.
Definitely.
And then the natural progression from that is audiobooks and
definitely,
or audio novellas or those sorts of things, which I've dipped my toe into, but they're a lot of work. So at this stage, I've only done short pieces.
So this is a pretty broad question, and you've sort of answered it in parts, but I think it's a good question nonetheless. How has your life experiences sort of developed your writing over the years?
I think to be terribly unoriginal, the one of the more profound things is having a child.
Yeah, definitely.
That really does give you a very different perspective on a lot of things, and even just the fact of being a father. When
Mm,
obviously I've grown up with a father, and
mm,
when you don't have kids yourself, it's almost like, first of all, you don't consider that your parents ever existed before you did, so you don't
yeah,
consider
true.
that there was any life before you.
Yeah, yeah.
And likewise, when you're a kid, you're not really thinking, hang on, these guys are fumbling through it, like they're
Mm,
trying to figure out what the right thing to do, or how to raise me or whatever. And I had two brothers, so there's fighting and all sorts of stuff going on,
yeah,
and you
definitely.
just never look at it from your parents' perspective. So that shift in perspective is really important. But
Mm,
also there's some evolutionary thing inside us when we have a kid. It doesn't work for everyone, but for 99% of us, where as soon as that baby is born, everything changes, and you just
yeah.
you will give anything to protect this little precious package. And
Mm,
so my son is almost a teen. From what I hear from everyone else, when it doesn't matter how old they get, that never goes away. That feeling of intense love and protection and all that sort of stuff.
mm,
That sort of shift really helps, because characters quite often, in any sort of genre, but what I write, characters, I tend to start with a character that's very strong, very powerful, and then through circumstance systematically strip them back to their
yeah.
bare components, where they don't have those sort of things. So they go through these intense emotional shifts. So if you've gone through that yourself, it's really hard to think, I thought differently about the world at one point, and then this change happened, and it significantly changed. It's just colors everything differently now.
Mm,
So that has really helped in writing, and putting characters in exactly that same position of like, oh wow, the whole world has changed. How do I work with that? So that's probably one of the big ones, I'd say. Yeah.
yeah, that's really good, Morgan. I love the transitions that you're talking about. But just sort of flowing on from what you've just said, um, in the sci-fi genre or fantasy genre, is there a
Mhm.
particular theme or setting that you like to focus on?
Yes, there is. So all of my stuff tends to go a little bit steampunk, a little bit, okay, not a little bit, very weird, very quickly. So the one of the main settings for one of my the main series that I'm writing is a city called Rust, and it's effectively it's a dream city, so it's located in kind of a dreamscape. Um, it's called Rust because the walls are made of old iron and brick and all that sort of stuff, and they've rusted over the years and all this sort of. So it's just a hodgepodge of people from all different races and times and places, all sort of smashed together. It's a cruel place. It's there's too many people on top of each other. It's all that sort of thing, and I love that kind of dense, cruel, if you like, environment, where there are those that have and those that don't, and they're kind of right next to each other. And the city's primed for revolution. Effectively, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And within that are horror aspects and a lot of steampunk kind of mechanisms and things going on. So I love anything to do that. One of my favorite writers is China Mieville, and Perdido Street Station, Kraken, the Scar, all those sorts of things. And I love his stuff. I could never write like him. Sometimes I feel like reading his stuff is like reading concrete. Sometimes it's very dense. It's
Yeah.
hard work
Yeah.
sometimes. But he just has so many amazing ideas, and I love the weirdness of it, and the having mundane things next to these exceptionally weird, strange sort of things. So yeah, a lot of what I write tends to have that. So I write kind of fantasy sci-fi, but not sword and sorcery fantasy, and not epic, space opera sort of
I think,
sci-fi.
yeah.
It's kind of a different sort of blend, but that's the stuff I like. Yeah.
Awesome. So, how do you manage writing? Do you prefer to write early in the morning or late at night? And do you sort of have a schedule to fit your writing in?
Yeah, so this is another one where my son has influenced a lot of this because he, up until the last year, would get up at 4 a.m. every morning, regardless of anything.
Oh,
So
wow.
I used to write at night quite a bit. I'd write till 12 at night.
Awesome.
And that very quickly changed when we had a child. So since then, I've adapted, and now 4 or 5 in the morning, I'll start writing, and I'll write for an hour or two every morning.
Awesome.
I find my brain is a lot clearer at that time of day. So it's actually easier for me to write. Even if I'm tired, my brain will come up with the ideas I need and, function a bit better. And then essentially I'll have a different goal depending on whether I'm writing or editing. So for example, the book that I've just finished the first draft on is called The Seven Hungers. It's a second book in a series.
Good title.
Yeah. So thank you. It's, you wait till you see the cover. The cover is amazing. An artist friend of mine did the cover work, and it was just so good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that the first novel is being released. When is it? Next month, about this time next month, mid-March. So that's written, but of course I've got to get the second one ready so that when people read the first, there's another one to follow up and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pushing myself to try and get that done. Managed to get the first draft done. So while I was writing the first draft, or while I'm writing a new project, I'll aim for 1,000 words a day.
Yeah.
If I can get that. And some days it'll be 2,000 to 5,000. Some days it'll be 500. But if I know I can do 1,000 without too much of an issue, so it's a bit less pressure on me to do that.
Yeah.
When I'm editing though, it'll usually be 2 to 3 chapters that I'll say, all right, I need to get through editing 2 chapters.
That's good.
Particularly with the first draft as well, because the first, you obviously go faster when you're editing because you're reading rather than writing, but you find so many mistakes and things you got to add in, and then ideas that you've got to, and even the time that you spend trying to figure out what you called this thing 5 books ago or 2 chapters ago or whatever. So yeah, sort of different measurement, but as long as I'm doing something like that, that keeps the demons at bay and makes me feel like I've done what I need to do.
Yeah, awesome. So final author related question. It's a bit quirky and I like asking each author this question. If you could do something during your adult life to become a better writer, what would you do?
Oh,
it's a bit tricky.
Wow. That's an interesting one. So many things. I'm a pretty stay-at-home kind of dude. So I'm not that adventurous, particularly when it comes to, overseas travel or anything like that. It would be, everything that you do, you tend to add something to writing, but it would have to be something very different to what I've done creatively. So it would be something overseas in a different country, maybe speaking a different language, and something completely like diving for shells or something, or abalone or something weird like that is so far away from anything that I've ever done before with people I would never normally meet. Something like that would be pretty cool. But you'd have to get me there in the first place, which is that's the trick.
Awesome. So getting onto your books now, could you let us know the title for your first series and just give us a little bit of an idea about what it's about?
Yeah, so the first series, Whiplash, is the first book in the series. So there's a series which is probably Rust Chronicles is the name of the whole thing. So there are short story collections, novels, and novels from different perspectives of different characters. So Whiplash is the first one that's come out, as well as a graphic novel, or it's really a graphic novella. It's not a novel size. It's only a small book called The Script Rebellion. And they kind of intertwine, but from different perspectives. So Whiplash itself is probably the easiest way to get into the series. And it's a kind of young adult, fantasy novel, but again, first person present, very fast, the whole idea behind that book is I wanted to get a main character who's an 18-year-old guy named Jack. very ordinary, very normal, essentially ripped out of his life, abducted, brought into a whole new strange world where he's forced to fight in a war that he doesn't understand. And it moves at a cracking pace. So the reader feels that same sort of disjointed, what the heck is going on? I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on, at the same time that he's trying to discover what's going on and all the rest of that. Essentially, the premise, as I mentioned before, there is this dream world that sort of exists, and it's built by the fabric of dreams, essentially. So if I'm dreaming and I dream of something that happens in the city of Brisbane as I'm in there, and then let's say 10,000 people at a certain time at night dream of that same city, there's a shadowy representation of Brisbane that pops up within this dream world. And there's all these cities that are kind of ebbing and flowing, but at the center of this dream world is this city called Rust. No one remembers the real name because it's been there for so long, and it is permanent. It's the only sort of permanent place that stays there. It's ruled over by a cruel demigod type figure and her cadre of lieutenants. It's oppressive, it's cruel, and essentially the way that people come to that city is they dream themselves in there, and some people on rare occasions are unable to wake up, so they just end up there and their body dies, and then they live the next life, in this sort of thing.
That's so good.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of so many things that you can do with that, and so many. But the essential thing is it's in the middle of a revolution on the back of a previous revolution 40 years earlier that failed. Because there's nothing better to write than a failed revolution, because it's much more interesting than a successful one. So that's the premise, and then Jack is kind of caught up in that whole thing, and then there are so that first book, Whiplash, is out now, and then there's another 2 books in the series that will hopefully be coming out this year, and then the 4th one I'm halfway through writing, so I have to get that one out, but no idea how many, but there'll be a few more after that as well. Then there are a few novels from the perspective of other characters that you meet in that Whiplash story. So there's a sort of crime detective novel called The Blood Below, which will probably come out this year as well. And then there's a few other novels that are, from different perspectives that are coming out. And then there's the Script Rebellion, which is that graphic novella, very different style. It's a really quirky style of artwork, and it's written in a different, it's a more of a ye olde English style of writing. And then potentially this year, a couple of comics from the Whiplash universe as well. So kind of a broad, multimedia type thing. Yeah,
I love how you've branched out into all these areas with one concept. It's great. So when and where were you first inspired to write this series?
It was around about the time that I was talking about, where I was working that dead-end job and not really happy, and starting to write and starting to think of ideas. So I wrote one novel, and I'm actually just looking up while we're talking, because I wrote a novel. I wasn't really happy with it. It was okay. It was a really cool sci-fi idea, but I just wasn't gelling. I was throwing around other ideas, and then for something I was doing, I can't remember whether it was a uni assignment or something, I was looking at Salvador Dali paintings. And I'm actually looking online now to see which one it is. I saw this one. So he's obviously a surrealist, but I can't find a painting. Anyway, there's this one painting that he's got. I can't remember what it is. And it is just a desert landscape. Ironically, nothing surreal about it. It's one of, you would think for me, it would be the weird one with the melting clocks, or, something bizarre like that. But it's his most plain kind of thing that he's done. So it's just a desert landscape with a little horse buggy kind of in the middle of the frame, moving towards a very small city in the distance. And I saw that and just first loved the idea of this kind of city. And and it's quite a yellow tint to the version of the image that I saw. But then there was another one beside it, which was kind of a little bit redder. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it was more of like a Mars kind of vibe, you know, red earth, red dirt, red sand. And the idea just sort of spiraled from there, centrally around that city. And then the idea of whiplash and how people interact with that city became the big thing. So it really started with that image while I was working in that job, and then just writing notes, drawing things, and then slowly, you know, sort of expanding from there.
Awesome. I love that painting concept. So, did you plan out this series, or did you just sit down and let it rip?
I was experimenting with short stories because I tend to be a little bit verbose when I write. So I was trying to curtail that a little bit. So I started writing some short story stuff. And then with this Rust idea, I thought, you know what, I'll write short stories, because also, there's a book called Rust Chronicles Volume 1, which will come out this year at some time. And it has these short stories. This is the one that has the short stories and the music lined up to them. That idea. The beauty with the short stories was they're quick to write. You can get them done quickly. You can edit them quickly, and you can do one at a time and then fit them together. And so I was basically telling the story of this city and some of the characters within it with, I think there's 16 short stories that take place. Some of them are very small. Some of them are much longer. The Script Rebellion story is actually in that volume as just a text story. There's modern versions. So the Blood Below, that sort of crime novel, that is in there, but in a different form. That was really the thing that started it. Was just, I'll just write some really cool short stories about interesting characters that I think would interact with this world in an interesting way. And half of the book are characters who are in the real world, and they dream of the Red City, or they're somehow involved in it. And then the second half of the book are all characters that are in that city, in the dream world, awesome. Not in our reality. So it kind of shift focus. So it started with that, and then the novels kind of came out of the characters that had already popped up that I really liked in the short stories, and kind of went from there.
Awesome. So you mentioned that painting. Were there any other writers or artists that you looked to while writing these books for inspiration?
Absolutely. Well, so China Miéville, like I said, he's probably my biggest influence. The ideas that more than any other writer I find for my style, he will mention something casually in a couple of sentences that is so profound to me that I think I could write a whole series just on that amazing, really, really, great idea. There's just so many big ideas that he comes up with in these, almost in the cracks, like in between the actual story that's happening. And that's the stuff I love. So there's definitely a lot of leaning on China Miéville stuff. I also like Jack Vance, not his fantasy stuff so much, but the sci-fi stuff, Eyes of the Overworld, the Kugel Saga, those sorts of ones, because again of the weirdness and the almost formulaic oddity of how he will use props and things within the story that really shift. Everything revolves around this one quirky little thing. I obviously like that. So they're two of the main ones, and then there's obviously I didn't realize, you don't realize this until you go back and you read these old classics. I'd always had an idea, Terry Brooks, the Druids of Shannara, and sorry, I almost messed it up, and that whole series. So I read a lot of those when I was a teenager, and then and then a bit of Robert Jordan, and then I went on to Eyes of it's the biggest franchise in the world, fantasy. It's on HBO. It was massive, and it's just, they're releasing a new, why can I not remember the name of like the biggest, Songs of Ice and Fire?
Yeah, Game of Thrones. Yeah,
Game of Thrones. Yes. Oh, God, that's just embarrassing. So the books, I started reading, the books, and they were amazing. But I tell you what, I listened to the audiobooks. There is no way I would read the text versions, because man, George R.R. Martin that dude just gets right into the heraldry, and just so many descriptions of flags and standards, and I just my brain gets lost of where I am. So anyway, so those sort of things. Joe Abercrombie's another one that's an amazing writer of fantasy stuff. So yeah, they're kind of the ones. But honestly, China Meowville's the main one, and I would there's that, and then there's film. A lot of my writing leans probably more on film than other written works.
Definitely.
Again, anything weird, set in a strange setting. There's even, like Dark City. There's a whole heap of, I can't even remember some of these the names of some of the films, but anything of those weird films where, or even scenes, like for instance in Hellboy 2, which was, that was 10 years ago now, or even more. And they go into, I think it's Goblin Alley is this place they go into. And you walk in there and it's just dense with weird creatures and people wearing all different weird stuff. It's only, a few minutes of the whole movie, but that sort of image struck me so much. And I'm thinking, that's what the cities of Rust are like. That's what it feels like. It's,
awesome.
So yeah, they're kind of the key influences. Yeah. Oh, and I have to also mention Dune, obviously.
Of course.
The whole Dune series, that imagery, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm loving those books. So tell me a little bit about your themes in your series, and what type of feelings are you trying to evoke from your writing?
Yeah, so a lot of it is driven by fear and peril, and as I said before, having in a lot of my writing, I'll have a very strong character that will get stripped down to being, weak and have to deal with that, the trauma of that. The other one, though, certainly on the Whiplash side, and the funny, because there's a bit of humor in the story, that the funny thing I love about the Whiplash series is the main character, Jack, is even 3 books in, clueless as to what's going on, and the weakest individual, it doesn't know what he's doing. He's winging everything, but he still nevertheless has something in him that is so vital and important that essentially the fate of the universe hinges on him. But he doesn't control it. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just trying desperately to survive, and surrounded by incredibly capable people who know their stuff, and he just doesn't. And particularly there's a couple of love interests in the story, and one in particular is just so strong and vibrant, and she is well trained and ruthlessly efficient, all the things that he isn't. He'll trip over his own feet, and there's this sort of goddess next to him. And then there's a friend that he has who's an assassin called Shadowfang, and she's amazing, because she's called Shadowfang because she needed to make up a name for herself and thought it was cool. So she that's her invention. It's not that other people are calling it. She's just calling herself that. Her actually, I won't tell you her real name because it'll ruin some of the surprises. But so yeah, and again, just incredibly powerful, incredibly strong, but he's not. So I love that idea of the difference between the power and the not having power. And then the key thing that happens again and again is put the things that the hero loves in jeopardy, and then see what they do, which is a pretty standard, kind of thing. Like, take what you love and threaten to destroy it, or even destroy it, or destroy part of it, and then see how the hero deals with that trauma.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So did you find you changed at all as a person while writing this series? Were there any new things you discovered about yourself in the process?
I definitely, as a writer, I definitely discovered that I have a certain style and a certain way of handling situations, which I'm trying to not do the same every time, because we're very predictable creatures. Particularly in going back and editing, because there are a few years between when I did the initial drafts of some of these novels and then went back and then re-edited them so they could get released with my current publisher. So because of that, I've gone back and there's so many things I've forgotten, but as I'm editing, my memory's so bad. It's like I'm reading it fresh. So some things I'll remember, other things I won't. So sometimes I'll genuinely be surprised and think, oh, that is so cool. I'm so glad I did that, because that's what I would want to happen. That's amazing. Other times I'll be writing or editing and I'll get to a point and I'll think, oh, I really need to, he hasn't spoken about this thing and I need to mention that. Otherwise it's going to be important later on. So I put it in there. 2 paragraphs later, I've mentioned it. So I was already obviously thinking that. It's just that I'm, that happens a lot. Or a lot of people have this happen, I suppose. So most of my thinking is done at night, right before I'm going to bed. That's when all of the next day's writing is sort of going through my head and all the rest of it. And I used to write everything down, whereas I don't now, for 2 reasons. One is I just run over it again and again, the main plot points. Because I realized even if I write it down, it doesn't matter. When I go to write a certain scene, if I know the rough details, I'll always tend to do the same sort of thing anyway. So I don't need to worry about forgetting something, because me being me, I'm going to write it a certain way. And then I suppose the only other thing was that fact is okay, because everything in me has been pushing to, I've got to be different and I've got to not be predictable and everything. But then you realize, well, hang on, not enough people know about me yet. I have a voice. It's taken me a long time to find that. Maybe I should just write everything that I'm doing in this same voice for a while and just see how that fits, and not be too worried about, oh, people are going to think I'm predictable. That's fine. So yeah, I suppose being a bit more comfortable with that has been nice as well.
Awesome. So this sort of ties a little bit to what you just mentioned. But I know myself from experience that all writers go through a period of self-doubt. How have you continued on writing despite feelings of self-doubt?
Yeah, so this is where the medium change helped me a lot, because so I'd been trying to get novels published. It's a very familiar story. Trying to get novels published, trying to get find a literary agent for 2 or 3 years. 300 odd rejection letters. A couple coming back saying, this is really interesting. Can you send me the details? I'll send more details, and then all I get back is it's not what I thought. Which is hugely helpful, because it's like, well, what did you think? What help me? How should I do this different? Or just the standard, just this isn't what we're looking for at the moment. And at that time, I was obviously a bit younger, and I didn't appreciate, there are so many reasons a literary agent won't pick you up. It could be, look, I've already got a writer that writes exactly the same sort of stuff that you do. Why would I compete with myself and have another one? It could be, look, we just can't sell those at the moment. That's not what the publishers are after. There's lots of reasons, and they're going to play the odds and go for the best. So if a sports star comes to them and says, someone's going to ghostwrite a crappy bio, book about my career, it's going to be badly written, but it'll sell a bazillion copies because I'm well known. Well, of course you're going to go for that, because it will sell, and ultimately there's a business behind it and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, so I went through that really bad dip of, well, I'm never going to make it, so what's the point of trying? And this was early on in self-publishing, so it wasn't as easy to get things out there. I did have a little crack at it, but there's also that feeling of, particularly back then, there's that feeling of, well, I've failed, and I'm, there's the shame involved with self-publishing, particularly in those early days of like, well, you're just funding this thing yourself because you didn't make it. It's much less like that these days, which is really, really good. But then the thing that changed me was when I got turned on to comics and indie comics and graphic novels and those sorts of things. It was about 7 years ago or so, maybe a bit longer. And when I finally discovered them, I thought, wow, this is an amazing medium. And I could start now, and I could get a comic done and out. And there's this huge, so there's still publishers. There's a lot of publishers, and I've published some of my stuff through publishers. A lot of it I've just self-published as well. But in the comics, there's not that same stigma necessarily about self-publishing your comics. And using things like Kickstarter and those sort of platforms, there is it's been done before, and it's very successfully. And so that kind of helped, because I could use the novels I've got, write them into comic scripts, work with an artist, put the work out there, and then just to get some immediate feedback that, okay, people actually do like this stuff. It's valuable.
Yeah, that's great.
And then that gives me enough impetus to then go, well, I'm going to go back to the novels, and I'm going to keep writing and developing the story, because there's enough there And if I don't get a massive publisher, that's fine, because I've got a mid-tier publisher or a lower publisher, or I'll self-publish, or all that sort of stuff.
That's awesome. So just coming back to your series, what do you hope people take away from it? How do you want them to feel at the end of your stories?
Yeah, so at the end of every novel, I want them to be absolutely hanging out for the next one, and almost a little bit annoyed if it's not ready.
Yeah, definitely.
Which, because that's good, that's what you want. But it also means they're invested and they care. There's nothing worse than that feeling of pushing through the end of a novel, which we've all done, and you're like, well, I've got to complete it, so I'll just keep going. And you get to the end of it, because you get to the end of that, you're probably not going to pick up the next one, because
definitely.
Or if someone says, look, you got to read this thing, you just got to kind of push through the first six chapters, and then that really is like, oh man, I don't want to write anything like that. And I'm a fairly impatient reader and writer these days, so I'll get into the action very, very quickly. So I suppose there's that on a practical level. But I never get this. I'm not an overly emotional person when I'm reading and writing and that sort of stuff. But the third novel in the Whiplash series, there was a moment where something happens and I actually started to tear up, and it was weird and embarrassing at the same time. No one's around, so no one knows, but it's so weird and a little bit embarrassing. I thought, why am I? But then I thought, hang on, if I watch a movie where something like this happens, I'm going to tear up and I'll be embarrassed about that as well. But that's the way I'm wired. So it hit home to me that I feel for these characters. They have a life of their own. And when things happen to them, which is that dramatic, it hurts me. And that's great. And that's exactly what I want for the readers, to feel that same sort of guttural connection to the characters.
Awesome. So in terms of feedback you've been getting from audiences so far, what type of feedback have you been getting? And has there been a certain audience that have really loved your books?
This is a hard one. This is something we all really struggle with, I think, as writers, is trying to get enough feedback. And there's reviews, but reviews aren't the same as just a reader contacting you out of the blue and saying, hey, I love this, I love that. Fortunately, I'm working with some really good indie editors that have helped me hugely in the last couple of years, because they're kind of a first blank reader of this thing that I've built in private. So even their feedback has been really, really good for things that I think, well, that wouldn't be important. Why would people want to know that? But then they've said, well, as a reader, I want to know more about this little thing that you just skipped over. Like, I'm interested in that thing. So those sorts of things have been really interested. The feedback that I tend to get is, I couldn't stop reading. When's the next one come out? It was too small.
Awesome.
So which is good. And I get the too small thing, because again, they're short novels. They're not long novels. So there's definitely a hunger there, and people enjoy it, and they love. The other piece of positive feedback was all the world building. They love. It's very easy for them to situate themselves in the world and everything, which that really. Hearing that makes me feel very happy, because that's something I try to do, but you don't always know if it's working. Or I've been in that world for so long. I think, does anyone else get this? If I'm just hinting at something, is that enough? But they seem to be getting it, which is really, really cool. I think in terms of audience, the people that like those sorts of sci-fi, fantasy, immersive world sorts of stories, the thing I'm struggling for, and honestly, I'll give you free copies of everything I've got if you will do me this favor. I'm desperate for people to tell me, what is my writing like? Because at the moment, like Whiplash, for example, the examples I get are The Matrix, Inception, those sorts of things, that's great, but they're films. Tell me a book that's of a similar sort of thing. And a part of that is the way that I write is more, I suppose, film based than novel or traditional novel based, which is fine. But I'm still struggling to find out, when you put your blurb on your own book and say it's like this, I'm still trying to find, and I'm trying to read books that are, it's not to say my stuff is incredibly unique or anything. It's just, it's hard. There's so much out there. It's hard to find things that line up with what yours is necessarily, to go, oh, it's kind of like you know, a version of this.
Mm.
But yeah, and also because of the comic books that I do, that there's a definite divide in the audience. There are some that will never read a novel and they will only read comics. There's some that will never read comics, and then there's some that are kind of in the middle and they'll read everything. So on a practical level as well, there are those two distinct audiences, and then the kind of blend in the middle.
So now that we've gone over your books a bit, you've got to tell us what books are you planning on releasing soon? And if so, could you give us a little bit of insight into these books?
Right. Okay. So yeah, Whiplash is out now. And as I said, Whiplash 2 and 3 will come out later in this year. I just have to work with the publisher on when that happens. There's basically a pipeline, and there's, as I mentioned earlier, I've written, I might have mentioned, I can't remember. Anyway, I've written, this is my 10th novel I'm writing now, but you'll only find one of them if you go looking, because the rest are still in the pipeline working their way through. So they're on their way. But I'm self-publishing a book which comes out on the 15th of March. It's called The Seven Hungers. It's the one I mentioned earlier. It's a horror, fantasy, epic kind of thing. It is, at the moment, it's only on Kindle, but I'll probably release in paperback as well. It is essentially about a crown sorcerer. So think modern world, but where sorcery kind of exists. And only certain people know about it. There's this organization called the Crown who kind of govern the whole thing. And there is this censured sorcerer who did a very, very bad thing 10 years ago. And as a result has been stuck in London and not allowed to move anywhere else for the last 10 years. And essentially the story is he gets brought in to an investigation because of something called an emergence. So that the underlying plot is essentially beneath our world or our reality, there are 7 realities below that, and they're called hungers. And the reason why they're called hungers is because some stuffy academic termed them hungers, 80 years before the story takes place. And so it just sort of took. And the reason why he called them hungers was because it's more of a verb, because they're actively trying to impinge on our world. And it's kind of like hell worlds, but not more of a fantasy sort of bent. And an emergence is when something comes through from one of those realms into our realm. And the Crown's whole deal is we want to squash that. We want to maintain, our world and keep it safe and all that sort of stuff. So this guy, Drake, Ambrose Drake is his name. He gets called in from London, comes on over to Brisbane, Australia, because let's do it for the Aussies. So the emergence takes place within Brisbane. He comes over to Brisbane to take a look at it. And essentially the only reason why they've brought him over and temporarily given him a reprieve is because he's the only sorcerer that has traveled to all 7 hungers. Because travel is forbidden. You're not allowed to. Awesome. The problem with it is, and I won't go into too much detail, but the problem with it is the first person he meets when he gets to the emergence site is his ex-wife, who is the lead agent in charge of the investigation. Sick. And the person that turned him into the Crown 10 years earlier. Sick. And is responsible for his, censure for 10 years. So that's the book.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so finally, could you please share with us how people can get in contact with you and get a hands-on copy of your books?
Yeah, so the books are sold, worldwide through anywhere. If you just type in Morgan Quaid, you'll see what I've currently got. If you want to see what's upcoming or just getting in contact, if you just go to morganquaid.com or find me on social media, I'm pretty well everywhere these days. On my site, I'll have details of what's coming up and when and all that sort of stuff. I'm always keen to meet fellow creatives and collaborate and all that sort of stuff. But also avid readers that just like to read and give feedback or reviews or anything like that. So by all means, get in touch. I'm happy to oblige there as well. Yeah.
Awesome, Morgan. This conversation has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. It's a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. For everyone who's watching this video, if you haven't already, remember to check out the social media links below. Everything Morgan just mentioned, make sure to put it in the description section. Also, if you'd like to meet other awesome writers and learn about our journeys and how our writing has developed, don't forget to like and subscribe. But that's us for now, guys. Thanks heaps for joining us. I'll catch up with you soon. Stay safe. Take care. Catch ya.
Cheers.